Now, listen, I mean, this sounds like this is developing fairly quickly. A second city, which we should say just reports at this stage, has been taken by the Wagner Group, and that is still to be verified. I mean, I just want to get your reaction to that, really. Such huge news. I mean, is Moscow genuinely in sight?
Well, I think, first of all, it's huge news, and a great deal is unknown, and a lot of the reports are inaccurate. The Russian media, independent reporting inside Russia, is currently saying that the report that Voronezh has fallen to the Wagner Group is not correct, but who knows?
I mean, there are also the intelligence coming out of the UK Ministry of Defence that suggests that some Wagner units are already moving north with the intention of getting to Moscow. Does that sound plausible? I mean, it's coming from a fairly official source.
Well, they have satellite imagery. They can see things, which of course I can't possibly see. I don't know the answer to that. We'll find out. It's what the boss of Wagner, Prigozhin, it's what he says he intends to do if he doesn't get the Minister of Defense down to Rostov to talk to him. And he says that he's not mounting a coup, he's seeking justice. I think it's all pretty widely open at the moment.
I mean, there is this sense, of course, there's a huge amount of antipathy towards Putin in the West, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Prigozhin is in himself a savoury character. What is your estimation of him as a public figure?
Well, by all accounts, I've never met him, but by all accounts, he's a very unsavoury character. He's a thug. He's put together this private army. He collected a whole lot of convicts to start it with, and he's been fighting in Ukraine against the Ukrainians on Putin's behalf so far. But he's always made it clear that he's independent of the Russian military command, and his quarrel with them has been brewing for a very long time, and he's trouble.
I mean, you know, a lot of people in the UK will hear the word mercenary and have a certain association with that. Can you just be a bit more specific about what that means in terms of the fighting unit that he's assembled? How wedded are they to the Russian state? I mean, are they completely outside of Russian military chain of command?
They are more or less outside the Russian military chain of command. They have been fighting inevitably alongside the Russian regular army. And over the last weeks, perhaps even months, the Russian regular military have been trying to exercise some sort of control over them. I mean, they would say they were patriots. They are mercenaries insofar as they're not paid by the state. They're paid by from a private source. So to that extent, they're mercenaries. They're not like our ideas of fellows rushing around Africa, overthrowing governments hither and yon. They are part of the current very disorganized Russian scene.
You were the British ambassador. Of course, you've got great knowledge on this, having been the British ambassador in Russia at the time of the 1991 coup against Mikhail Gorbachev. I mean, just how much more different is the political culture in Russia to the extent that it makes things like this more likely? I mean, of course, we haven't really got a history of that in this country, but does the sort of historical political culture of Russia make a potential coup more likely there?
I think hitherto it probably hasn't done. I mean, the Russian military, historically speaking, have usually been well under the control of the state. They were in the communist time. The communists were always afraid of a military coup, and they took every possible measure to ensure that one didn't happen. And on the whole, the Russian military did what they were told. They lost their tempers with Gorbachev in 1991 because they thought he was destroying the country. And some of them did mount a coup, but it failed because the army itself and the KGB were split. And many people remain loyal to the idea, at least of loyalty, that they shouldn't do that sort of thing. I think that since then, Russian political culture, especially under Putin, has quite seriously degraded. And I think that a lot of relationships, a lot of conventions and principles of how you run public life have been severely damaged. And that, of course, is, amongst other things, above all due to Putin himself.
I mean, how How powerful a position is Prigozhin in at this point? I mean, because it seems like it's a tricky bind for Putin to find himself in. So what kind of power does that give the leader of the Wagner Group?
Well, I hesitate to say anything very definitive about this. I would have thought that he can't succeed. I would have thought that the military will unite against him for reasons of professional self-respect as well as loyalty to the government. Other thugs in Russia, particularly the man who runs Chechnya, who is a Putin ally, has come out very strongly against Prigozhin, and so have some of the people he was sort of defending, which is the people in East Ukraine, the Russian super patriots who took over there. So he hasn't got a wave of support welling towards him. And I would have thought that that means his chances of as it were, mounting the successful code, still more his chances of actually, taking over Russia are pretty slim. But, it's less than 24 hours since all this started. There's lots of developments that we still need to see before we can make a firm judgment. Meanwhile, I just go back to the question on intelligence. I think that the sort of thing that the Ministry of Defense knows, and actually people like Bellingcat know, the people who caught the Skripal murderers, they use satellite imagery and they can track the movement of units inside Russia. And I wouldn't be surprised if some fairly solid evidence started to come out in the course of today.
I mean, if it's not going to be Prigozhin himself that would potentially lead a coup or start, the end of Putin's sort of reign in power, is it a signal perhaps to others in Russia that there is a level of discontent that would allow them the sort of bandwidth to step in? Maybe not him, as I say, but maybe another big political beast in the Russian political landscape?
Well, I think it goes deeper than that. Putin's been around 20 years. That's a very long time for anybody to stay in power, and their instincts for power degenerate over such a long time. That's the first thing. Second, he's surrounded by people on whom he relies for his position, but those people are younger than him, and they must be calculating where are they going to be when Putin leaves? What's their future? They must be looking to what happens next. Now, that means that in general, in Putin, leaving aside what's just happening, Putin's position is increasingly brittle. That doesn't mean, say, he leaving again what's happening at the moment aside, that he was about to go at any minute. But he could go quite quickly, or he could take a bit of time. But I don't think his position is secure as it's sometimes been portrayed in the West.
I mean, obviously, Western nations have been incredibly hostile to Russia since the invasion of Ukraine, but there are nations that have been perhaps more sympathetic. Is there a degree to which he might reach out to countries that have been more on Russia's side, thinking of Iran, China to an extent? Will he perhaps appeal to them to make noises on what's happening?
I would have thought not. I mean, the people who've been supporting Russia, like Iran, China, India, some African countries, South American countries, are primarily, their attitude is primarily, as far as I understand it, none of this is a war between white Europeans. We are not involved, and our main aim is to make sure we don't get tangled up in it. So we're keeping clear. So they haven't expressed support for either side. They have been affected. I mean, the loss of Ukrainian grain in Africa is causing desperate difficulties, and so it's not surprising that last week a whole bunch of African leaders went to try to persuade Putin to lay off and were sent away more or less with a flea in their ear. I don't see any particular reason why they should now come out in his support.